Hello and welcome to Voices for the Voiceless. I'm very excited to be joined today by Gary Shapiro, Orang Utan Republic Foundation president and co-founder, and author of Out of the Cage. Now, this book is full of so many things that would surprise you about orangutans. So welcome, Gary. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Molly, for having me.
To start, I would love to talk a bit about your experiences and your findings with ape language studies and their
Sure.
cognitive abilities.
Well, it's been a long journey. I started actually in 1973 on my master's degree program at the Cal State Fresno, and working at the time Fresno City Zoo with this juvenile Sumatran orangutan named Azak. And so for over, within a 2-year span, I had a chance of going in for, on a daily basis, off and on, and was able to really get my first taste of what orangutans are like, what their cognitive abilities could be. And really, it got me kind of looking at the species in a different light, because as a zoologist, we typically go out and we want to study their biology, their behavior, their ecology. And I was looking at cognition. So I had to actually take classes in child psychology and psycholinguistics, things of that nature, doing kind of a cross-campus discipline, which was also quite challenging but fascinating to me. And what I was able to do using this, what they call match to sample training, getting her to associate a plastic symbol with a reference, some object or action that she could then learn to associate and either produce a sentence with the plastic symbols or read them, comprehend them, and show me she had an understanding. And this was it was never been done before with an orangutan, to my knowledge. So it gave me a chance to kind of look at orangutans from that perspective. And so I was able to get my degree and then went off to the University of Oklahoma to work with chimpanzees, and with the teacher who principally worked with Washoe, the first signing chimpanzee, is Dr. Roger Fouts. And so while I was working with Roger and the program at the Institute for Primate Studies with this one chimpanzee named Allie, while I was in the throe of doing my research with him for my at that time, I thought it was going to be my PhD thesis, I got the call from Roger asking me if I wanted to go into the jungles of Borneo to teach sign language to orangutans.
My goodness.
That was quite a thing. It was like, I think, July 5th, 1977, the day after our Independence Day. So it kind of triggered that memory of that. But it took almost a year to get the necessary paperwork done. So in July 1st, 1978, I actually made it up to Camp Leakey for the first time. And I spent 2 years there pretty much working with the orangutans that were being rehabilitated for life in the wild. And so just to let people know, I didn't work with wild orangutans with this project. I observed wild orangutans in their natural environment, but I did not manipulate them for the purpose of the signing studies that I was doing.
Rinnie, the semi what do you say? It's free ranging in your book.
Free
isn't it?
ranging, ex-captive, yes.
The tale of Rinnie and the fact that you were courageous enough, because it is to be noted, these are not cuddly, cute animals. When anyone listening to this will read the book, they will hear of Shugito, is that how you pronounce it?
Sugito.
Yeah. Who was a notorious aggressive male. And you can go back to the chimpanzee that attacked that woman, and it was not a good time. So for you to just go up to this orangutan, swim across the river, please tell me more about Rinnie.
Yeah. Well, I should point out also that Sugito was really the reason I went out there. I was asked to find out if he might have murdered
There
another
you go.
orangutan, a youngster. And so that was kind of the impetus to even like search for a graduate student.
Who done
And
it?
this was Birute Galdikas, who was doing the research out there at the time, and she's kind of the orangutan version of Jane Goodall, who got her start with Louis Leakey, along with Diane Fossey, who worked, of course, with gorillas in Africa. But Birute wanted to find somebody who had experience with orangutans and might be able to teach science to this one suspect. And Roger, who she had met at a conference years before, uh, knew the right person because I was the only other person in the world who'd ever done this, and I was in his kind of stable of graduate students. And so he asked me, and I immediately said yes. Um, but I also was I guess, surprised and amused at the thought that maybe I could get an orangutan to confess to a murder. That to me was kind of interesting, but nevertheless, I was able to use that kind of prompting to get me to go out into the field, and it was much more than just investigating this murder. It was more like becoming somebody running the camp when she wasn't there, really being a multifaceted field person in a camp where you've got to fix things all the time, especially when orangutans are tearing them apart.
Absolutely.
So yeah, when I first got there and I saw this orangutan ambling on the other side of the river from camp, and I found out it was Rinnie, I was kind of curious about meeting her. And as you pointed out, great apes like chimpanzees are very strong, and they can be very cuddly and they can be cute. That's one of the reasons why the illegal pet trade was so successful.
I see.
Just to go back, but when they grow up, when they become larger, they become more destructive, and they're less inclined to be kept inside somebody's home when they're busy tearing things apart because they're looking for things to eat and to play with. So to occupy their very brilliant minds, they're busy opening things up. This is how they use their brains. So people don't want to have them at that point. And of course, it's illegal to have them as pets. And so we were getting them from high officials and others who had them as these kind of exotic pets in their home. And Rini happened to be one of them. I think she came from Jakarta. And so she eventually was old enough to be on her own on the other side of the river. This is one of the things we did back then, was kind of relocate a certain number of them on the other side of the river so they weren't another kind of a problem in camp, because we had enough of them already as
Enough
bicultural
troublemakers.
orangutans. And most of the time they were okay. They were sober citizens, but on occasion they would just kind of want to go in and to the dining room and steal our dinner, or that kind
Or a
of thing,
canoe.
or canoes. And so we had to, of course, engineer ways to prevent that from happening. But getting back to your question, when I first got out there, I also was kind of surprised. I did this. There was no other Westerners there to say no to me. And so, I was kind of given the authority to run camp in a sense. I had a letter from Birute to give to the staff, letting them know I was kind of in charge when she wasn't here, which of course, they had to accept. But nonetheless, I was also just learning my Indonesian. So for me, I had no barrier to prevent me from going out there. And it was only because I had worked with Azak before, had worked with chimpanzees, felt that I could probably manage myself, but it was exciting. And I think, as I point out in the book, it was that first contact with this adult free-ranging orangutan was really special.
Can you talk me through? I know that there's so much to it, but you detail some techniques in the book. how on earth you would, not that I'm recommending someone to walk up to a wild orangutan and try to start teaching them sign language, but with Rinnie,
Right.
how did you start bicultural tool use? I mean, this is huge mental power for orangutan to be using. It absolutely blew me away that this was possible. But how did you even begin to start that process?
Well, if you mean the sign learning to use as tools, because that's kind of what they do, it's very simple. You have to have a relationship with them, number one. And it's really hard to get an orangutan to learn the configuration of a sign unless you can mold their hands. Yes, you could imitate, let them imitate. You could like show them how to do it, but it's not as effective as we learned with the chimpanzees as molding their hands and then also associating it with something vocal because they can understand language. They can understand the words. They just can't produce them. They cannot articulate them easily. It's only by deep and intense force can they utter vocalizations that might be like words. So there is a neurological blockage. They just haven't evolved the neural pathways to from their articulated centers of their brain where they like use their hands to their vocal tract. And so it's very, very difficult. So, but they can articulate their hands. So if you move their hands in the right configuration, like for example, as we know, language is arbitrary. What sounds we make, what words we say, we just associate them with something like an object or an action or some attribute, right? And it doesn't matter because every language has their own right words for it. So, and the same is true with sign language. And even though there is a dictionary, American Sign Language Dictionary, there were some signs that weren't in the dictionary, and I had to create. So, what you do is you just
Amazing.
agree to the configuration, and then you go through the process of molding their hands. So, for example, the sign for grass would be the little G hand shaking up and down. Now, this is a very difficult sign for great apes to do, to hold their hand out and move it in space like this. It's much easier to actually do something like this where they touch their fingers together. There's something about, and this is something I learned in my research that I did. It conformed with what they learned about chimpanzees too. Touch signs are easier to learn than non-touch signs. So if you're, say, touching the back of your hand, or you're going like this is like the sign for leaf, or this is the sign for flower, much easier than if you're just putting your hand in space and moving it. Okay, and of course, when we do sign language, we're doing a lot of that with humans, but we're a little bit more advanced with our ability to move our hands in space and do the sign language that we see. But for orangutans, we have to adapt to their kind of physical characteristics and their abilities. I didn't want to make it difficult for them to communicate, and we could do that. But what I was doing at the time was just trying to figure out what factors influence sign learning. That was, in fact, I think, the title of my dissertation, because I didn't want to get into the thickets of showing they had language or some form of language, which would be a much higher hurdle to jump and to get my committee to accept. And my mission at the time was to start this work, to gather some data, and to tell a story and get my degree. So I realized that, of course, what we're doing is sometimes controversial and not always accepted by many of those kind of conservative, traditional scientists who've studied language. And what we were doing at the time was really showing that great apes, apart from humans, had the ability to communicate using what looks like language. And so many of the design features or the characteristics of language we would see in the performance of the orangutans and the chimpanzees. And so the case was made that, yeah, they have their own type of language. It does kind of overlap with many of the attributes that we have. But for orangutans, I was able to demonstrate that they used it primarily as tools to get things of interest. And so, not being as sociable as, say, chimpanzees, orangutans spend most of their lives, as you know, looking for food. And it's one of the reasons they're as social or as not as social as other great apes. It's because they've been constrained by their ecology, the availability of food. And so they have to be on their own, looking for food. And anyway, getting back to what you were talking about, molding the signs with Rinnie, that was really special that first day when I got her and I said, come like this. And I would come closer. I would mold her hand and, like come, and I'd come closer. So I was doing that. And I didn't have a data book with me or anything to write down the data. So what I did was I grabbed leaves in the swamp and I would take my fingertip and my fingernail and I would make little indentations in the leaves to keep track of the number of times I molded.
Brilliant.
And so what I was doing, I was looking at the effort put into the sign teaching and then correlated that with their performance. So I wanted to see how much effort it took to get them to perform a sign and do it correctly. And this, of course, took months and months and months. I later took those leaves back to camp, transcribed them onto paper. So
that's fantastic. I mean, honestly, when I read that, I could not imagine a team of orangutans stealing a canoe or you sitting on this riverbed with this orangutan. That first moment, you are communicating with another species successfully. You are managing. That must have just been the most incredible moment. What I would give to have some kind of experience like that with an animal, that breakthrough when you realize you actually know what I'm saying. I'm actually communicating myself to you, which brings me to my next question about the theory of mind. Personhood. Wow. So anyone listening to this is probably absolutely amazed by what you managed to achieve and wondering, I didn't actually know they were that intelligent. And that's, of course, when you came to Sandra and managing to take part in the first non-human personhood case. It's an incredible story.
It is incredible. I think it's time we start looking at the great apes in this new light.
Absolutely.
Because for too long we have just treated them like objects without any rights at all, taking their habitat and converting it, for our own use, and marginalizing them far greater than they have been. Because as I pointed out, their social structure has been based on living in a very nutrient poor world. They don't have enough high quality foods in any given place for any length of time to evolve the kind of sociality we see in other great apes. So many of them, when you see them in the field, are not fat and large like you see them in zoos. They're literally walking on this knife edge of between having adequate nutrition and starvation. So when their habitat is destroyed, many of them, they leave the areas and they go into villages, garbage dumps. They're desperate, looking for food.
Of course.
And with their ribs showing through their abdomen, and it's just so sad. And then of course the wildfires, everything else that are going on, only makes it more difficult for them. So, we've treated them so poorly historically, and because we are a part of a community of equals, I believe we are great apes ourselves. Genetically, we only differ by 3%. And yet, here we are still in the 21st century. And I know that this may not resonate with everybody in the world, but clearly there is, I think, a need for us to kind of re-look at orangutans and other great apes in this new light, that we see them because there is absolutely no reason to separate them from us in such a way that they would be seen other than sentient beings that have almost the same genetics that we have. Yes, they've evolved to their niche, to their habitat needs, but they are sensitive, caring individuals who, as you pointed out, do have a theory of mind. They are smart enough to understand what we're thinking or what we're not thinking. And this, of course, they use amongst themselves, but when they are with people, we see this demonstrated every single day. And it's quite amazing. And again, it tells us that we need to rethink how we treat them and hopefully give them some basic rights that are, say, attributed, say, to the Great Ape Project, which came out, say, 20 some odd years ago, with the focus of advocating for great ape rights, basic rights, the right to life, freedom, from torture, and the right to live. I mean, those types
It
of
sounds
basic
so
things.
simple, doesn't it?
Yeah, they're very, very simple rights, and yet we're still struggling. And there's some countries who have already moved in that direction. So they've evolved culturally and legally. In the case of Argentina, the judge there granted Sandra non-human personhood status, which gave her the chance to have her day in court, which I was fortunate to have been asked to talk to the court about orangutans in the wild, ex-captive orangutans and captive orangutans, and kind of discuss the differences and why we believe that Sandra deserved another life in a sanctuary, which is where she is today. So I was very, very happy to be part of that.
It's just reading that when I read that line that she got the personhood it's emotional because they deserve so much more than they get.
Yes.
And it's happening all the time. I mean, you said in your book that I think it's 69,000 advocates. So one orangutan will have 69,000 human advocates.
Humans, yeah. If we look at how many orangutans there are, how many humans are, it's such a disproportionate number, right? We have just covered the planet, and so it shouldn't be a hard reach to get some of those 69,000 to step up and to take action and to speak out loudly. And so, I mean, this is something we're doing here today. We're giving, hopefully, people a chance to learn more about orangutans. And again, that takes us to like orangutan caring, which is the Orangutan Caring Week, which we started in 2005. It actually evolved from Orangutan Awareness Week in 1995 that we started when I was with the Orangutan Foundation International. Now it has continued to grow. And there are dozens and dozens of organizations who have signed on. And it's a chance for people during that week to get to know more about orangutans and to hopefully take action.
Could you tell me a bit about some of the ongoing projects? I mean, I know there's so many things that you're doing, not just with people, but with the environment and then the orangutans.
Well, first of all, I think it's absolutely essential. If we're going to solve the problems, we need to work with the people who are living at the periphery of these habitats. They're the ones who can either destroy them or they can save them. And as much as we say about writing laws, unless they're enforced, it's just something on paper. So it became very clear to me working in the field and just subsequent to that we needed to engage local people in the solution and step back as well-intended Westerners, which we've had this history of kind of going into a developing country and kind of telling them what to do.
Wading in,
and then, pushing our values and throwing our money around. And, it comes with a price, as we well know. But if we can enroll local people, educate them to become the conservationists that will be needed, then we're planting seeds and we're going for the long haul. We're actually looking for a long-term solution rather than a Band-Aid on a problem, which is what we were doing with rehabilitation. It's like, well, why are these high officials and celebrities and others buying orangutan babies? Don't they understand the laws? Or some of them, of course, think they're above the law because they should know. But at the same time, we also know that the people living near these national parks and protected areas may not know the laws, may not understand the importance of what orangutans are, the gardeners of the forest. And so having an education program in the villages and sub-villages around these parks, I saw as very, very essential. And so I've been able to, again, help small groups of interested, motivated conservation educators develop the capacity to form their own organizations and become more and more effective in delivering education to the children in the villages, at the schools, the government schools, or even creating small schools or schoolhouses in villages that are quite remote, giving them the opportunity to learn the messages that we have to give them. And again, it's done in the Indonesian language with the Indonesian kind of cultural spin to it. We have to be very, very, I think, sensitive to that. And one of the things I like to do when I go out there is ask the village leadership, what do you guys need? What is it that you're looking for that you're not getting? And if there's a way that we can somehow use our meager resources to kind of leverage something, this is what we want to do. We want them to get the buy-in. So we're not just showing up, throwing the money at them and walking away, but actually form a partnership. And we do this for many, many years. And so this is one of the things I'm very proud of, is that our group has been able to work in a number of villages around Gunung Lusur National Park in Sumatra to build this kind of momentum. And I just met with them last month, actually, when I was there in Indonesia. And what we're going to be doing over the next several years is take the villagers who are receiving this education and turn them into teachers themselves so they can amplify the message to other people, other groups around the park. So It becomes more generative. And so I think that's kind of the route to go, is that we need to make this generative. Because if you do the work and all you do is spend a few years and then pull out, people go back to the way they used to do things. But if you give them ownership in the process and they realize it, they will then keep it self-sustaining. And then you can move your resources elsewhere and let that drive itself. And I think that's the more powerful way of doing it.
Absolutely. That's the power in education. And as you say, giving them the feeling they're contributing, they're compassionate about their conservation. That made me think about the orangutan projects, the power of mama. So the women are empowered and they are stopping wildfires spreading. They're protecting peatlands. And it's just that's the way to do it. And I think if people are passionate and they feel compassion, they're going to want to help those orangutans, because of course human and animal conflict, as it is in many, many countries in the world, not just Sumatra or Borneo or anywhere, but because of the territory being encroached, people are then upset that, as you said, these orangutans wander in hungry, looking for food. What is the normal situation? So if an orangutan does wander into village territory,
it really depends. It really depends if this village or this area has had some education by some of the local NGOs that are out there, because over time it does diffuse out to others who may not have received it. They've heard word. They know that these are protected animals. So, but then again, you get people that may not know this, or they're young adolescents and they're trying to have fun, and so they may taunt the orangutan. They may, they gather around it and then get it very upset, as you would imagine. But it just depends on the location. So there have been situations where they've allowed it to pass through the area without incident, but we also know where they've met their fate by people who were afraid of them. I mean, this is what they say to the police and the forest officials, that they were afraid. But again, you just don't know. It's been happening with greater frequency, unfortunately, especially now in East Borneo. And so we just need to keep educating people. This is why the program that we started 20 years ago, the Orangutan Caring Scholarships, are so important. Because this is something, Molly, I want you to know. We focus only on those provinces where orangutans live in the wild, from Aceh and North Sumatra to West Central and East Kalimantan. Those are the areas where orangutan populations thrive. In Indonesia, now there are orangutans up in Sabah and Sarawak in Malaysian Borneo, but we do not have programs in Malaysia. So we're focusing on Indonesia, where we have a very, very strong base. And I'm just so proud to say that we are now giving every year 6 new scholarships to students at the universities where biology, forestry, and veterinary science is provided. And we've already now given out over 300 since we started with a single one in 2006. So again, this is our 20th anniversary this year. I'm looking forward to celebrating it in a bigger way. We've got some plans up in Aceh. We'll be going up to Aceh, which is that very special province of the northern tip of Sumatra, where we have very good relations with the universities there that have the veterinary program. And we're hoping to get some government officials to help us recognize the 20th anniversary. It will be really special this year. So we're also going to supercharge the scholarship program by injecting curriculum and practicums in the technologies that are now being brought to conservation, using drones and AI and robotics, acoustics, other ways that we can kind of leverage the tech of today to become eyes and ears in the forest, to help us understand the biodiversity, the threats, and other aspects that are now very, very much on the forefront of conservation.
Tell me more about drones. These eyes in the sky, are they going to protect orangutan? Will they be able to spot poachers or?
Oh, wow. I mean, it could be done in a lot of ways, looking for fires. Maybe hotspots is one of the things. They can be used actually to drop seedlings in areas that may have been burned to help promote growth. They can be used maybe even to spot orangutans in their nests. 25 years ago, I was pioneering a new technique using infrared technology to spot orangutans in the trees glowing. And the idea was, instead of just looking at nests, which is what we do to count orangutan populations, is that we go through the forest, look up into the trees, we see what we believe to be nests, and then we count them on either side of the transect, put them through an algorithm of leaf decay, and we try to then backtrack to figure out how many orangutans in this one area. It's fraught with all kinds of errors that you might suspect. But wouldn't it be great if you could actually fly over and see orangutans glowing in their nests, actually getting a direct census? This is the dream. And at the time, 25 years ago, infrared was giant cooled boxes that you would have to, take into an airplane. We actually flew one of these FLIR cameras in what they call a powered parachute over Tanjung Puting National Park. Well, we actually flew it in the area outside. We didn't have the we made the common sense decision not to fly it over the bay at the time. So we went to the care center where they had released some orangutans that night before. And that morning we flew over and we could actually see them in the trees. So we were able to show that you could see orangutans glowing in the trees. Since all of that, the technology has shrunk in size. They're now the size of a matchbox. They can go on drones, and there are literally projects now going on in different orangutan studying areas where they're using infrared and drones to look for and to hopefully count the presence of orangutans and other wildlife too.
What are the population numbers like at the moment for orangutans? How badly have they been affected by these various threats?
Well, it would be nice to be able to pull a singular number out of my hat and tell you, Molly, the truth is we don't know for sure. We have some rough ideas based on the last census that was done probably 8 years ago or 9 years ago. And even those data are not necessarily accurate because, we really need to do this more regularly. And, since that time, a lot of change has taken place. A lot of area has been cleared.
Bad
And
change.
yes,
Bad
there's
change.
very few good stories, but there are some good stories.
Oh,
There are new areas that we're actually rehabilitating or reintroducing orangutans into a couple of areas of Sumatra, up in Janto, up in the northern part, where the some of the orangutans are going up there, and then down into a place called Bukit Tigapulu, or 30 Hills, down in the Jambi province of Sumatra. These are now being overseen by some of our partnering nonprofits, doing an excellent job of taking these orangutans and now repopulating an area. So we're creating a new founder population for the future. Having said all that, we still know that the existing wild populations are a threat. There are some areas like the Sinkil there today. That forest area is being changed by illegal palm oil conversion. So more pressure has to be put on groups like the RSPO, Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil, which we are a voting member. And so the idea is to kind of make sure we monitor the situation that's happening in the field. And then we need to do more frequent assessments of the population. That's why the drones and overflights that use these new algorithms and new tools, these new sensors in the sky, might be a way to do it on a more frequent basis. And then getting together and to decide. See, everybody has to come together at workshops and pool their data, because literally these orangutans are in dozens and dozens of what we call meta populations. These are small populations within which the orangutans are breeding, and they find it hard to go from one meta population to another because of mountain ranges, river systems, and now palm oil plantations and other human developments, which are forming barriers for genetic migration. So we know that each one of these metapopulations, as they get smaller and smaller, are more prone to localized extinction. So it's up to us to understand the numbers that are there, to become advocates of each metapopulation, to ensure that they are going to have maybe corridors in the future to go from one area to the next. And that's another one of these modern conservation techniques you may have been hearing about, because it's happening all over the world, where wildlife needs to move across the freeway or, move from one place to another. And so those become major challenges. So if I was to give you a number, we now know there's this one species called the Tapanuli orangutan in the Batong Toru area. If you look at Sumatra and you see Lake Toba and you go to the west coast, you go down a little bit. It's south of Lake Toba if you look at the map, and you'll know there's this one area where there's only 800 orangutans. This is what we believed a few years ago. We don't know if that's still true today, if the numbers have dropped even further or gone up, but there is a dam project there, there's a gold mine there, and it becomes problematic as habitat shrink because of development or because of other projects there. So these are the ones that are genetically distinct from the Sumatran orangutan, Pongo abeli, who we thought all these orangutans on Sumatra belonged to this one species until it was speciated, I think in 2017, when the researchers saw enough genetic differences, acoustic in the long calls, other behavioral things and characteristics, that they decided to speciate this particular group of orangutans. And they're very much up in the hills. They're difficult to get to. I've never seen one in the wild.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
We hope that population will stay intact and will thrive. But it really requires monitoring and attention to their population, and then, of course, figuring out how to educate the people nearby.
Some of the most biodiverse, rich tigers, elephants, not just orangutans, birds, insects, all of it. I read something very troubling that palm oil had a spike in 2023. So there was the record low of 2021 to 2022, and there was a spike. It's everywhere, isn't it? It's in everything, palm oil. It's such a useful, cheap tool. Over half or around half of the products that we use.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What would you say are the things we can do to make palm oil more sustainable, or relinquish it completely, if that is even an option?
No, we cannot say no to palm oil, but we can say yes to sustainable. And when I say sustainable, I mean this in a sense that we work towards sustainability, because I don't believe there's any way we can say that palm oil is 100% sustainable because of what's happened in the past. That is something that I think the industry would like us to kind of forget and move ahead. But from my perspective, I hear the cries of thousands and thousands of orangutans who've lost their lives because their habitat was then converted into plantations. How can we forget that? But we can hold the industry responsible for improving how they do their work, how they get their communities, giving them informed consent to actually change their area or plant trees. So we are actually helping out smallholders. These are groups that are not doing the big mega plantations of hundreds of thousands of hectares, but the ones that have maybe 20-hectare parcel of land, their own farm, and they're being encouraged to plant palm oil. We are working with them to do it in the right way so they can then upsell their product and get a higher price as a RSPO product. So those are ways to actually, because literally there are millions of farmers whose livelihood depends on palm oil now. So it would be terrible for us to say we're not going to buy palm oil. But if we buy the right kind of palm oil, that palm oil that is now sustainably produced, without child labor, that's looking at the carbon footprint, that is trying to reduce the pesticides, reduce the amount of fertilizers, so we can move it into a more organic way of operation at the local level, then we're helping the local people out find additional crop that they can fall back on if, say, other like cocoa or coffee or some other product that they're selling isn't doing so well. And again, this depends on where they can grow palm oil, because it can't grow up in the high areas where coffee is. It grows well in the same areas where orangutans can survive. And this is the conflict, is they both demand that same area. So it's a really complex issue, and it requires complex thinking and not some simple one-size-fits-all solution. And again, that's one of the things in conservation I think we have to realize. No matter what we do, we have to look at each situation independently. Yes, take out the toolbox that we have and try to find the right tools to address that local problem. And then if we stay at it long enough and we give ownership to the people, then they can keep driving it forward. And so getting back to palm oil, it's a very important oil. It can be turned into so many other types of feedstock for other types of industrial use. But there's the downside, and we have to keep that in mind as well. And my hope is that we will see kind of an equilibration take place soon, so that if orangutan populations are falling, they're going to at least level off and start to become stable, if not rise in areas that we can work and manage for the future. So I think the positive idea I'd like to let people know is I don't think orangutans will ever go extinct in all of their range, but there may be metapopulations that we talked about that are so small that if we don't address them, they could go extinct very soon, within, 20, 30, 40 years, if we allow that destruction to continue.
As well, I wanted to touch on captive orangutans, because there's lots of people listening to this that will say, well, it's okay because in the UK here, we've had some recent births of baby
Yes.
orangutans in a few different zoos. And after reading your book, it's a very complex issue, because I think, what do you call it? Moral Frankenstein? Is that your...
Yeah, we create a moral Frankenstein. The more we learn, the more we realize we shouldn't be doing what we're doing. It's like we now understand their sentient abilities, their cognitive abilities, the fact that they share the same emotions that we have. And we don't, the kind of work that I did, 40, almost 50 years ago, I'm not sure we should just repeat that for the sake of a graduate student learning how smart an orangutan is. We know that. There's so much more we can learn from their natural behavior. There's so many other innovative ways we can look at them to kind of tease out their cognitive abilities. And if we do use the science, it has to be done in a very limited way, maybe to go after things like, cueing them on trying to do something that we can then look at to measure some other part of their abilities. Okay, like one of the things I wanted to do is teach them how to go to like a box that might have a certain color that had a very delicious food like the durian inside, and see if we can kind of test this idea of a mental map, a cognitive map that we all talk about. And I believe they have this. They have the ability to know where the fruit trees are in the forest in their home range, because their brains are that smart, and we see them making beelines to fruit supplies or sources directly without wandering around. So the idea would be to teach them the signs, find a box, put it in the forest, color it, put in a thing, and then say, the durian's in the blue box, and see if they go straight to it. That kind of thing, using it as probes, but not just to kind of show everybody, oh yeah, they can learn how to sign, because we know they can. And the thing is, we see they're using signs naturally in the wild, beckoning signs. We see that with chimpanzees quite a bit. And I think understanding their natural behavior is far more important and gives us a chance to really come to connect with them in a more profound way. What I'd like people to understand, there's a lot more nonverbal communication going on than just teaching them some signs and showing that they can do that. But if we can kind of get to the point where we are sensitive to picking up those signs that they're giving us naturally, how they communicate naturally, we are going to be far richer and more connected to them. And I think that will serve us all well in the future.
That really reminds me of your wonderful love story with Princess. A story that did bring a tear to my eye. I was absolutely blown away. Would you please be able just to touch a little on Princess and your time with her?
Well, I would say Princess was one of the reasons I became so connected to orangutans and dedicating my life towards helping to save them. She was a youngster that I saw early on when I got to Camp Leakey in a holding cage with the other youngsters. They kept them there to prevent them from being killed by pythons at the night, or pigs, bearded pigs that wander the area. So
Wow.
a place for them to stay. And when I was taking care of them, feeding them, sometimes medicating them, some were sick, I saw Princess And she was the cutest orangutan, just sitting there, of course, interacting with some of the others. Um, and I remember taking her out one day just to give her a walk into the forest. And this is before I adopted her as my orangutan daughter for the sighting study. But at that point, she was so afraid to come down from this tree. Uh, so she eventually did. I brought her back in, and I saw that, wow. When I start to do this one experiment, I'd like to home rear her, and possibly emulate what was done with Washoe and with Coco the gorilla. And so I did home rear her. I took her out of the cage. She actually leapt into my arms, and so she chose me. And I brought her to the guest house where I was living at Camp Leakey. And so we lived, she slept with me for a number of months. And of course, when she had her own room and she was feeling, sick or afraid, I would let her sleep with me, to have that time. And I would take her, of course, around camp, taking her down to the river. We'd go swimming together. I'd take her into the forest. And we would sit, on the porch of our guest house in the morning with a plate of rice and food, and I would use that as an opportunity to teach her science. So I was doing the home rearing in the field, and this is something that is still unique to the study. Nobody else has ever done this kind of work in the great ape's natural environment. Neither chimpanzee, gorilla, only this particular study done 47 years ago. We did it at the time where it was possible to do it. And Princess, she and I, bonded. I kept track of her even after I left in 1980. I came back in 1981. She remembered me. She signed hug. I took her through a series of tests as part of my doctoral project to see how much she remembered. And then I was able to show at that time that her relearning of the signs that was part of my doctorate project was correlated with her interest in the objects. So it makes sense that the interest hypothesis of learning, if you're interested in something, you're going to learn aspects of that much faster than if you're not interested. And we see that, of course, in schools where kids are bored to tears and they're not learning a lot. But if they are interested in something like computers or games or whatever, they really learn a lot. Same is true with orangutans. So, they learned those signs. They were interested in the objects. And Princess remembered the signs for years later, even though she got sloppy with the signing because nobody was working with her. And I would come back, and the last time I saw her in 2011, she was still doing the signs for more and for food, and she could do drink. And, I had a wonderful time that last time with her. But since then, I haven't seen her. My theory is that she's still alive. This is my belief. And I got to tell you, unless I see indication that she actually did die, I hold in my heart the possibility that she is still wandering in the forests between the Sungai Bulu River and the Seconia River, where Camp Leakey is. There's only 10 kilometers distance between those two areas, and there's a vast forest there. So I believe that she's there wandering, and you never know. I could run into her in the future.
You never know. You guys are so bonded, that kind of love. I think you would know if something had happened to her, because you guys were communicating with each other throughout these months. She's speaking to you. She's telling you how she feels. Was she able to ask you how you were? Was she able to kind of induce a conversation like that?
That's a very good question. At the time, she was so young, I think it was the focus was on her, like when she was sick. I was certainly focusing on how she was feeling. Um, you know, if I was like, pretending like I was crying, she might come up to me and give me a hug, that kind of thing. But the thing is, there was a deeper connection, not just to the signing, but just the connection, as we pointed out. I think being in the presence of orangutan, there's something so special about that proximity that you do pick up a lot. But some people are not tuned into that, and they may not read them properly, and they could get injured. So this is, again, one of the risks we face working with any animal, whether it's a dog or an orangutan, is having the humbleness to realize we may not understand it completely, and to try to take the right measures, not to force ourselves onto their personal space, because they're going to defend themselves. And I've been bitten by orangutans over the years. I understand that I also, even though I think I know orangutans well, I haven't been with them for a long time. And when I go out now, I keep my distance. I make sure I respect their size, their strength, their majesty. I do not want to get close to them to the point where they see it's a threat, nor do I want to show as an example to ecotourists that we can do this.
Yes.
There's that aspect too. I have to serve as a good example. And in the past, I would come up to Princess, mold her hands, and I would let people know I have a personal relationship with Princess, and this is why I'm doing it. But we try, it's a little bit hypocritical too. And I understand that. And so I'm very sensitive to the perception of how, we can, sometimes overstep the privilege we have of being in their presence. So I want to make sure people know that if they ever do go out, keep your distance. Make sure you don't approach the orangutan. Now, on the rare occasion, say some youngster just climbs up on you, that's a very special moment. But it's something we don't advocate doing. It's like when we see whales. We know that we're not supposed to approach whales if we do whale watching. But if a whale comes up to us, what can we do? We just have to be very careful. And you've seen videos of people petting whales and scratching whales and all of that.
You're chosen sometimes. It just happens, doesn't
yeah,
it?
It sometimes happens. But I think in terms of like the ecotour principles, we have to be very clear about it. We want to make sure that primates who can catch our diseases, all of our respiratory diseases, we keep our distance, because a lot of people do go in the field with illnesses that they don't want to report because they don't want to miss out on that opportunity, or they may not even know they're sick. They may have a subclinical level of a virus they could easily pass to an orangutan or another great ape. So again, this is what I like to let people know. Do go out, do see orangutans, see it with a guide that knows the area, but follow the ecotour principles that are now pretty well accepted internationally.
The woman who started Animal Experience International she built a community of people that do responsible animal tourism. So you're not going to be riding an elephant. You're not going to be hugging a sloth. And I think even now with social media, you would hope it would be more known how damaging a wildlife selfie can be, how upsetting it is for them. But I think we're still learning that. So definitely your point about ecotourism, you do a lot of work with that personally with the Orang Utan Republik Foundation.
Well, I do them on occasion. I'll be doing one next year with Jack Dalton, the kid conservationist, this young man who's incredible. He'd be great on your show as well. But he's somebody who, from the age of 8, knew exactly what he wanted to do, is to take orangutans off the endangered species list. And so he's our youth ambassador. And he and I are going to be doing an eco tour next year in June during his summer break. And we're looking for students who want to go out, and we'll go to, go out to central Kalimantan, to Palangkaraya. We're going to see the Sabangao National Park, where the largest wild orangutan population exists.
My goodness.
It may be hard to see them, but they're out there in this beautiful swamp area, worthy of a visit. And we're going to be giving lectures and talking to the students who receive the scholarships there at the University of Palangkaraya, and then going out to another orangutan research area just east of Palangkaraya, at the Mawas orangutan area at Tuanan. And we're gonna see orangutans out there as well. So it's going to be a special 8-day tour next year. I may be doing something this summer between scholarships that I'll be presenting in July. I haven't yet put it together, but I invite people, if they're interested, to contact us and find out if they would like to go out, because it does take time to prepare for that kind of thing.
So exciting. There is so much going on, so much you're doing. Just to surmise, for anyone listening, would you please be able just to give some tips for what people can do to help orangutans? Maybe not going all the way to see them, but just, actions day to day, things
Sure.
that they could do to help.
Absolutely. Everybody can work to save orangutans, help orangutans every day, not just during Orangutan Caring Week, but every day. Probably the most important thing you do is shop responsibly. When people go out and buy products, they're voting, in a sense, with their pocketbook. They are making choices. And if you look at labels, if you look at the products that you're buying, try to find products that use materials from commodities that are conflict-free. And that means products that are not sustainable, that don't have perhaps the RSPO label if you don't know for sure, or products that you realize may come from areas that are using conflict products or commodities. So again, be informed as a consumer. I think that's the most important thing we can do. It's also vitally important to educate yourself. Educate yourself about the issues, because so many people don't know. They're easily distracted by their phones with social media today. We all are. We're scrolling and looking at that next beautiful bit of content that somebody curated and it's caught our eye. But rarely does it have the information that will help you make good choices or better understand orangutans. So do seek it out. There are a lot of different organizations that have great content on their websites or on their social media posts. You can Google them. Just Google, orangutan organizations. You'll see a list of them. So Orangutan Republic Foundation, of course, is one, but there are many, many that have started since the first one that I helped co-found in 1985, which was the Orangutan Foundation International. That was the first one. Now there are literally dozens of them, and they're all doing good work. And I really recommend people take a look at that. There's a lot of information. Know some of the details. Go dive deeper than just the superficial. I think that's also very important. And then another thing people can do on a daily basis is like make a small donation to organizations. It doesn't have to be a lot. Just think about a cup of coffee a month. If you do that, that becomes, maybe $30 a year, $40 a year. That's the kind of sustainable funding organizations need. So deny yourself that cup of coffee. Give that to an organization that's helping to save orangutans. And there's different ways of doing it. There are adoption programs. There's other types of certificate programs. You can help a student, for example. We have a student program if you want to help somebody get a scholarship, that kind of thing. They're not that expensive. And then, of course, if you plan to go on an eco tour in the future. So, there's a lot of different things you can do. During Earth Day, coming up next month, you might even want to volunteer with an organization and do an outreach event. Help magnify the message. So that is something you can do as well. Look around to see if there is an organization in your neighborhood or near your home that you can volunteer for, either in person or remotely. Many groups are looking for volunteers. So those are the kinds of things people can do.
Bake a cake for an ape. I did that.
Yes. Did you do that?
I did. There's a video on our YouTube. I'll send it to you. Yeah, I baked a cake for an ape. It was horrendous. It tasted so bad.
Did you have orange frosting on it?
It was a carrot cake.
Oh, it was a carrot cake, so
It was
it's
a
already
carrot
orange.
cake. Exactly. That was my thinking. but it was the first carrot cake I've ever cooked, and it might be the last. But still, it was the thought that counts. Yeah, bake a cake for an ape. As you say, there's so much going on, so much awareness, and there's people writing brilliant books like this out of the cage. Gary Shapiro, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing this beautiful story with the world.
It's been my pleasure, Molly. Thank you for having me on the show.